So yeah, typically we live edit these things where you have all three cameras going and you're able in real time to switch between the different camera angles. So as I'm speaking, the camera's able to be on me. We have a little back and forth banter. It shows both of us. And then when you're speaking, it goes to you.
It goes to me. So how are we doing it this time?
So this is going to be a manual process in the editing room.
We're going back to the Stone Age.
Yeah. Well, this is, I mean, well, interestingly enough, of course, you talk about, I mean, that's how live sports is edited, right? Like you're not seeing it edited after the fact. And you're like, how do they know to show their replay then? It's like there's literally somebody there with 32 different cameras and all the different camera people throughout the stadium. And they're looking in on what's happening at any given moment.
That's wild.
And then they're just switching between it. That's the person back there who's directing the whole entire thing.
Right. I mean, that takes watching sports to a whole new level, right? It's like you're watching a bunch of screens. It's like, got to have ADD there. Can't stay on one screen for any too long, right? You got to change it.
Do you prefer to watch live or do you prefer to watch at home when it comes to sports? Or does it change by sport?
Depends on the sport. Definitely. Soccer. I haven't been to a hockey game, but I heard that's one live. I don't know where the hockey puck is on TV. I can't follow it. But I hope, I haven't been to a hockey game yet, but I hope you can see it live. Soccer is one I would watch live. Football is 1,000% a TV sport.
Yeah.
1,000%. I mean, the 3rd and 1, you're like zoomed in. Mm-hmm. You can see it. I'm sitting up in the 300s. I don't even know they'd hit hike. What happened there?
See, I really like the announcers. I love the announcers because I think they have good analysis. They're talking about really interesting stuff. I think the announcers actually make the show. Like if you have a good announcers, you got some legends up there and they're just going through they're the commentators. I mean, that's really great.
So you're telling me when you're that guy in the stands that's got like the headphones on and the antenna coming out, and there's Drew. He's listening to the broadcast and he's live.
I always thought that was the dumbest thing until I realized actually this is really eerie. I'm watching a sport and it's just all I'm hearing is the sounds from the sports and people cheering and I'm hearing no other noise. And I don't know if it's a sensory thing where we just feel like we have to listen to something else. We have to also have our ears being consumed while we're watching, but it makes a lot of sense now. I'm like, that's a brilliant idea. I'd love to hear the announcement, but I'm watching the thing live.
And so the cycle continues. You're the kid that sees the old guy and you're like, how does he do that? And then you become that old guy.
Yep. I've become that person.
It's a natural progression. You have to let it happen. You can't fight it.
Yeah, but that is why I typically do like watching at home, because I do think when you're at home, you have the ability to see the instant replay. You can pause if you have to, and you can speed up if you need to.
Have you ever tried watching at home with no commentary? Like they'll have the broadcast sometimes where, I don't know, they've done it in soccer before where you're watching on TV, but there's no commentary. So you just hear the sounds like you're there.
See, I think that's strange. I've never seen that.
It is strange.
Because I don't know what's going on. And I think at the game, at least they're letting you know what's going on when you're watching it happen closer. I don't know, something feels different. I think that's too, is I like having the commentary because it's telling me some stuff that's happening on the field that maybe I'm not familiar. All of a sudden they blow a whistle and I have no idea what exactly it was for. And if you're watching live, you're like, I didn't see what happened. Now, if you're watching at home, you can see, oh, no, they clearly got the ball first. I mean, imagine offsides calls, and you're just stuck there, and you have no idea what's happening. Everybody at home is watching the VR.
The VAR, right? Yeah. And they're able to see, here's the line and everything. And I mean, baseball commentary has to be my favorite because there's the most storytelling that happens in baseball.
Well, because there's the most time of no action happening.
They've changed that, though. Now you got timers everywhere.
It's going quick.
It's going pretty quick.
But so I think this is an interesting sort of segue to what we're talking about here on today's show, which is sports and streaming subscriptions. And if you're watching at home, then now you have an option, really, to go between watching on TV or watching on a streaming platform. And so this is sort of, I kind of tie it back to, you know how people don't have phones anymore? They just have cell phones.
Right.
I don't know how many people actually have home phones anymore. And cable is kind of like the home phone, where it's like now you don't need anything. You don't need cable. You could just have Wi-Fi. If you have Wi-Fi, you can get cable because you have all the different options.
Right. Now, there are people that still have home phones. And it's like, it's funny, in the Indian community, it's like if you don't call the home phone, that's not good.
Oh.
Like, you invited my wife, but you didn't invite me because you didn't call the home phone. You called her.
Okay. It's
just the nuances. We're like one generation, right? We're almost done with that.
Right.
But it still kind of exists. Oh, you didn't call the home phone, so you didn't invite us. You just invited her.
It's like wedding invites where it's just addressed to the whole family instead of to the individual person.
Yeah, let's move forward.
Cool. Well, for anybody who's watching this episode, we're actually in our special location, which is the reason why all this is the case. Is we don't have our whole setup to live edit like you would see live sports. That's a whole thing too. I'm thinking about who owns the rights at these sports to all of the cameras. Obviously, there's the camera crew who's there, and each network has their way of doing it, but it's the same camera shots, I believe. That's a whole industry I'd just love to understand. So as far as the streaming platforms go, like they don't have a team of people who are experienced in editing live sports in real time. And then also, certain announcers and commentators are signed to certain networks.
Right.
Are they going to be able to pull? Like, I would be really curious if some of these streaming platforms are going to be able to pull the announcers or the celebrities or whoever's going to be the commentators for those sports to make it interesting and engaging enough to want to watch it. Because I've watched sports on streaming platforms before, and a lot of the times the announcing is just not as good.
Money talks. That's what we'll see today is
Yeah.
money talks. So if you want the best talent,
Yeah.
you can get it.
There we go. Well, with that being said, talking about money, that's finance, and that's what we're talking about today. So let's get flowing with the Fintech Flo.
You are now entering Fintech Flo.
All right, what's going on, everybody? This is the Fintech Flo. I'm here with a very special guest. I'm your host, Drew Carrick, the rapping CPA, producer at Flowcast Studios, strategy and planning director here. Do a little bit of everything, but I've got a special guest here again today, filling in here. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jason Dale. I don't have that many hats. Product marketing manager here at Flowcast. One of the many ex-accountants now in a non-accounting role. And I got to admit, how cool of a company this is to work for, where before I was doing accounting and now I'm sitting in front of the rapping CPA in a pink lit room and mics and all this setup and learning about production. This is I didn't think this would ever happen.
Well, it's cool. We're good to have you. And then as far as like some insight for folks, you're a CPA who now works in product marketing.
Right.
How are you using that license in product?
Well, so I cover our compliance management products. So obviously we're learning that buyers in the compliance world are very technical. And so it's useful to stay up to date with what's happening in the industry, new accounting guidances, compliance guidances that are coming out. So it's useful to stay up to date. And at the same time, for my own need. I think accounting's still cool. I went to school for it, worked really hard to pass the 4 CPA exams. There's no reason to just let that thing go inactive. I did, and now it's like the thing that got away. Now you want it back. And so, but from a practical standpoint, just staying up to date with what's going on in the industry and being able to speak authentically. And that's the big DNA of Flowcast, is reaching into the buyer, and that we even hire that way. And so that's the main focus, is now being on the compliance management product. It's like, you got to stay up to date with what's going on in the industry.
Sure. I know you had a little bit of a plug to the internal auditors, right?
That's right. No, internal auditors are a very technical group, right? They're the unsung heroes. Those guys need more credit, and because they're so technical, they're so sharp and in tune with what's going on, that third line. And so to do them a good service of putting out good content and being authentic as well, is you got to stay up to date with what's going on.
Sure. I'd maybe compare that to like the fourth line in hockey. Like, those are the people, they're the enforcers, right? That gives a lot of energy. That gives a lot of hype to the team. And I think sometimes that line doesn't get the credit. I'm thinking if there's any other like sports positions that you'd be like, this is, you know what it is? It's like the, until the blind side came out, right? That's Michael Orr. Like, you're protecting
Very
the blind
true.
side of the QB.
Yes, the left tackle, right?
And people don't, you don't think about like, oh, left tackle, that's like a role that I want to grow up and be. Everybody wants to be quarterback, running back, wide receiver, cornerback maybe, or nobody talks about the importance of the line that's protecting, right? And
Exactly.
especially left tackle.
Absolutely. And that's a grind to be there. I definitely don't have the build. I never played that position, not even in Pee Wee, but center backs, I'd say like center backs
Sure.
in soccer, where it's like you hold the line, you're responsible for where the line is offside or onside. That's kind of where I see internal auditors, where it's like you see the whole field, and then, you kind of dictate on the field. I don't think they're quite goalkeepers, because that's sort of, you're not involved in the play. Internal auditors, they can, if the offense keep the ball and they're able to attack, center backs can get into the attack. You've seen Van Dijk, Rio Ferdinand, Vidic on these set plays. They're able to get forward and score goals. Internal auditors need to score more goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love to see that. But I think one of the sports that we're going to be focusing on for this episode, of course, just given the news, and this is the FinTech 411, is basketball, right? So I want to start off with the joke that I typically do. I usually have one-liner. Mike never gets it. So I don't expect anybody to ever get these. And for those curious, this was written in coordination with ChatGPT. It wasn't just ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is not really that funny at this point, but it helps give me some inspiration.
Sure. Let's hear it.
So what do you call a financial analyst who is a three-point specialist?
Is it something with like corner threes?
Close. It's a hedge shooter
Oh, nice.
instead of an edge shooter.
I don't get it.
We're shooting around the perimeter. We're shooting hedge. We're hedge fund. Hedge shooter. So that's what I mean. It's not always this for this. It's not always necessarily the funniest. It's always a work in progress. So with that being said, let's hop in here to our first article. This is from the Los Angeles Times. The NBA completed an 11-year, $76 billion media rights pact that will change the lineup of partners after the next season, ending its decades-long relationship with cable network TNT and entering a new partnership with Amazon. So, yeah, there are new broadcast partners. This is what they are. It's ESPN and NBC. They'll remain key broadcast partners, while Amazon Prime, they're the new guys, will join as a new partner. This marks NBC's return to NBA broadcasting for the first time since 2002. So this is a whole shakeup. Obviously, NBC is not foreign to the sports streaming world,
Right.
but Amazon Prime is.
Well, they did the NFL. They had the Thursday night, but yeah, getting in the NBA. I think, the NBA, if you look across sports, NBA is making the biggest push for globalization. The European influence is coming there. I mean, you see, men's basketball. We used to just assume that USA was going to be dominant, and now, timely being the Olympics, you're seeing teams like Serbia, Germany, Spain, some of these other teams that are really. I think it's not so much that our team's getting worse, USA, but the talent in Europe is really catching up. The coolest thing has been to see like players like Luka and the way they play. It seems so slow, but it's actually he's got just the one step, and it's very European, right? It's not about being the fastest, strongest, tallest. It's just having the right technique. And so you're seeing that influence come into the basketball world. But what a sport that's just growing so rapidly, right? Globalizing.
It's fundamental basketball, I think, which is making it work for other parts of the globe. In America, I feel like we've over-prioritized just athleticism, like pure, raw athleticism, which can get you very far, but you still need to have those fundamentals. Like you could be super talented, but you also need to understand the basics. And so I think with a lot of these other countries, there's a whole strategy that happens with it. It's not just, let's throw our five best players out there and they're going to beat everybody. Because if they're all selfish players, they're not going to work well together. And I think we've seen this in like March Madness before. I think there was the Harvard team that made a little bit of a run against some big teams just because they had played together for 4 years.
Right.
Or it might have been Yale or Princeton, one of the Ivy Leagues, and they were the same team. They played for 4 years straight. So by the time they were in their last year, they were just so in sync that they were playing against a bunch of freshmen who were super talented, who were much better one-on-one. Right. But as a collective, they didn't necessarily mesh well. And I think you're seeing that with some of these other teams.
Yeah, and you see in the European national teams as well, because those players play together for so long.
Yep.
So they at the national level, they've got like a true team cohesion. Where with the USA, it's tough. I think we've still got arguably the best talent in the world. I mean, no one's going to size up against LeBron and the other USA players we have. But how do you get them to play together? But nonetheless, man, it is cool to see the influence of other countries entering the basketball world. I do also think from a sports standpoint, I'm big on sports. Yep. I love sports. Like growing up, you wouldn't find me in the gym, obviously. But see me on the field. I love playing sports, soccer, basketball, big ones. And the European influences, I think you get a lot of freedom with basketball, like you do with soccer, right? Soccer's big globally, but you can play soccer anywhere. You can be in an alleyway, and you can just work on doing different tricks or different moves. Similar to like basketball, right? You have different moves. You've seen Steph Curry do something different. Michael, obviously, MJ was doing all different kinds of moves that people hadn't seen before. And so that creativity breeds, I think, more interest in the sport. And so in terms of from an investment standpoint, I mean, the NFL is trying, but I was a kicker in high school for like 6 months. Yeah. And it was just too like rigid and like this is what your role is and this is what you do. And the locker room structure, there's a hierarchy there. You don't really see that in basketball so much, where it is a bit free flowing. You have plays, but then you can have LeBron just drive the lane and dunk, or have Luka take a step back three.
Right.
Those things are also possible.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things too is this popularity, this rising popularity of basketball globally, right? Because that's been a whole big push as well. You talk about summer leagues, you talk about a lot of the college players who don't make the NBA, they do go overseas. It helps kind of grow it and push it up there. Everybody knows, I feel like soccer is the world sport, just except for the US, or we're working on it. Right. But the interesting thing about basketball is I feel like there was a decline for a little while in just people are like, oh, basketball is kind of done. It felt like it's just people hucking up shots. It's like a permanent all-star game the whole entire time, and people kind of grew to disdain the lack of effort. And it seems like it's kind of got a little bit more of a revitalization, and now that there's more eyeballs, people are trying a little harder. Some of these mega teams are not as powerful as you thought they were, because people are realizing it is still a team sport. It's not just all about the stars in particular. So I'm wondering how that impacted this conversation. I think this is also the Caitlin Clark effect. Even though it's WNBA, it's still put eyes on basketball as a whole, right, and made people interested. And so one of the things I think that's interesting about this is with the annual payouts is ESPN's paying $2.6 billion annually. NBC is going to pay $2.5 billion annually, and Amazon's going to pay $1.8 billion annually. There's a lot of money getting thrown around, and I mean, Amazon's throwing a bunch of this. Unfortunately, they're big enough that they can, but they're paying for those rights. They're obviously seeing this play here in this opportunity to broadcast the NBA. Whereas I think if you were to go back 5 years ago, it was sort of on a little bit of a decline where I was like, I don't really know if it's worth it as much anymore. Like, how many people are really tuning into basketball? People are kind of checked out. I think baseball was facing this crisis a little bit until then. Then they shortened up the games, tried to make it a more exciting and exhilarating season. You're seeing with the NBA, they added the in-season tournament to try to drum up some more hype. And it seems to be working so far.
I think the globalization, what I'm looking for with the NBA, what's happening is, like, if you look in the soccer world, you have, it's played across the globe. But you have certain leagues that are like the top tier. That's where like the best players want to be. The English Premier League is like the top league in the world, in my view. That's where all the best teams are. The best talent want to end up in England. The best fans exist there, right? The most passionate fans exist in England. And I'm looking forward to, hopefully that becomes the NBA, where the best talent, the pinnacle league, and the top tier is the NBA. You're gonna have leagues throughout the world where more talent will be developed, and there will be other leagues, and you know, maybe the TV rights of being able to start to show those other leagues will be just as interesting, because I think the style of play will be different. You'll have people that fall into whatever style of play they enjoy watching. Yeah. But I'm hoping that, you know, the NBA still becomes like the top premier where all the top talent wants to be.
Sure. Yeah. So you think this is a good idea for Amazon? You think they got in here at the right moment?
I think so. I think if you look at the valuation of these teams, just continues to rise, and it's an entirely valuation play, right? I mean, it's also a tax write-off play as well, but that's besides the point. Sure. We'll get to that later. But I mean, if you're Amazon, they've got the best people on it, right? They know they can look forward. I think there's something about, like, everything's been calculated, right? All the possibilities and everything has already been calculated. There's little unknowns left, and so if Amazon's investing in the NBA, I do think, I mean, just taking a step back, right? Look at how popular, again, it's gotten globally. And I do think the valuation of NBA teams will continue to go up, even as the popularity in other leagues grows.
Is this Amazon not overstepping its boundaries by, you know, I mean, what's Amazon sells stuff online, right? Or they at least broker the sale of stuff online. Now they've got their own, you know, brands that you can buy too, which I buy plenty of. Right. But
it's crazy.
They're getting into this space.
You saw Amazon started as like an online store, and then it became AWS was the next big thing, the host on web services, and now it's like Amazon Video is like the next big thing, where they're investing so much, and they're getting the healthcare. I'd like to think the optimist in me is like, well, they're improving processes, they're improving things, right? Like they're getting the healthcare. Well, they're hopefully improving healthcare, modernizing healthcare. Yeah, by getting in the NBA, providing it more globally and better streaming service, hopefully. But I mean, it's sad to see TNT go. I will say that was one of the few
big losers.
Man, they are the big losers. And I think even I hope Amazon and these other groups can bring in, like we said, Money Talks. They can bring in the best groups
Like
of
Charles
commentators.
Barkley.
Charles, Shaq, and all those guys. I mean, people argue that Shaq doesn't bring as much, but I like Shaq. I like, just the cohesion of that group. But hopefully they can bring together good talent. We're really going to miss TNT. I'm going to miss TNT.
Yeah. So I think here's what I think the big play here for Amazon is: imagine a world where you're able to watch, and I think this is why live sports, and they tried to get into, I think they started kind of getting into this where they're talking about different streaming options, and Amazon and different streamers are trying to be able to offer. What Amazon uniquely has that's different from like Netflix, I think they want live sports perhaps because they're trying to make the play for like why you should subscribe to them as if they're the new cable. And also we have live sports, so why would you need anything else? Amazon, a little bit different. They're not trying to be like the go-to streamer per se, but I think with Amazon, there's this notion of I can watch a sport, get really hyped about that player, and buy their jersey while watching the game with like one click because I'm watching it happen. Especially when you talk about AI now, it's going to give you that opportunity. I wouldn't be surprised if the TV or your computer, your laptop, whatever, it's listening to you, right? And you're like, oh man, I love Jokic,
Right.
Well, and then now all of a sudden a thing comes up. Would you like to buy a jersey? Who is it for in the family? Is it for your son? There's 6. Christmas is coming up. Hanukkah's coming up. Whatever the holidays are coming up. Their birthday's coming up. And it knows that. And then you can just click and buy and it'll get them the jersey.
How far are we from an Amazon like city where it's just everything's Amazon?
I would have done it by now if I was.
Just like everything, your healthcare, your grocery, your e-commerce, and your live TV, everything is just through Amazon.
I mean, this brings up so much, which I think is a perfect segue into our next segment. But I want to wrap this one up with the accounting perspective here. Is obviously this is going to have a huge effect on revenue recognition. Of course, you're talking about context of licensing. You're talking revenue models, futures, and you're seeing this trend of traditional network companies sort of increasing their balance sheet with sports rights and licenses as like those are the assets that they're focusing on. That's how they're bulking up with these sports rights and licenses. And to be honest, I think it's because we've seen the Hollywood industry where there's a lot of confusion over what works and what doesn't work. Marvel's been, flopping and striking out with trying. Disney was like, no, we want more originals. Now they're going back to, they're like, people are sick of seeing the same old, remake. We got to make new stuff. Then that didn't work. So now they're going back to doing the remakes. Mm-hmm. And I think all of this is like, what has stood the test of time and always has since the Roman Empire? Sports.
The Coliseum.
Yep.
Intangible assets is also another big area here. Mm-hmm. Like you said, with the licensing and the revenue models that exist, the intangible assets are also growing, and that's what you made point on the balance sheet as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we're talking about these big mergers because that's one of the things you talk about in Amazon City. One of the things I think about when it comes to an Amazon City is like, would anybody let them own all those different segments where you could just be completely reliant on Amazon? I mean, we already practically are. I could buy my groceries there. I can buy my clothing there. I can buy any gift there. You could buy, I think at one point they have like a car. You can buy like a AUD house. I think the only thing you can't buy at this point is like a flight.
That's insane. Yeah.
And if you could do that, there's really no reason you'd ever, they host the websites. You really don't need any other platform at this point.
Where did the antitrust laws go?
That's what I mean. But for some people, for some entities, it's being super strictly focused on. And that's what I think is interesting is like the FTC is kind of choosing which industries are it's going to break up and which ones are like JetBlue wasn't allowed to merge with Spirit, even though they're still outside. Both of them are outside the big four of the airlines, but they still didn't let that happen. Mattress Firm and Tempur Sealy were trying to merge so that they could own the whole vertical of making the mattresses and selling the mattresses in stores. That was shot down, even though they only own like 3% of the mattress firm market. So it's really interesting what's being shot down and what's being allowed. It makes me think there's maybe some grease that's going to make sure that happens.
Something in the background, right, that we can't see, but that definitely must be going on.
But so anyway, so this brings me to, you're talking about mergers and stuff. We got Paramount and Skydance will beef up CBS's sports portfolio. This is from Sportico, the business of sports. So this deal structure was a merger that involves Skydance Investor Group, and it comprised of the Ellison family, and some people might know that name, and Redbird Capital Partners, paying $2.4 billion for National Amusements. Paramount will then merge with Skydance in a $4.5 billion cash and stock transaction, and with an additional $1.5 billion capital infusion to Paramount's balance sheet. Strategic implications of this is that the merger consolidates a variety of sports broadcasting rights under one entity, including the NFL, NCAA men's basketball tournament, top college conferences, and the Masters tournament. It also brings together Paramount Paramount, CBS Sports, and Skydance's growing sports documentary unit. I mean, that's a behemoth of a
Behemoth. I have to admit, I mean, I do this. Paramount is one of the outstanding streaming services that I still subscribe
You
to.
do?
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, Champions League actually, that's what it is.
Okay.
They've got the Champions League, so I pay for that. But now it's like maybe I'll get more bang for my buck by being able to beef up the content that they'll be able to provide.
Well, I think that's what makes it interesting is like you will get it just for the purposes of one specific show. And I think we're seeing a lot of these streamers have gone ahead and they've each pulled at one. And that's what's frustrated people is like, I just want to cherry pick the ones I want. I don't want all the other nonsense that comes with it. But they're kind of stuck in this situation where you have to get the entire package and then you're paying for 10 different packages because they have baseball, they have soccer, they have hockey, they have basketball, and they have different leagues. And I got Paramount for the purposes of watching The Offer, which is about the making of The Godfather.
Cool.
After I finished that, I was like, all right, I'm done. I didn't need it. Right? Like that was the only reason that I had it.
Right. Here's your login back. I don't need you to share your login information anymore.
But I think this is the frustration that people have had is like, you don't want to pay for all of these because they were trying to price each of these streaming platforms at a level that would be like, oh, well, we've got a bunch of offerings. And it's like, yeah, but most of the offerings people don't want.
It's interesting because the allure of subscriptions in the beginning was, like you said, you can pay for just what you want. And the problem with cable was you get like 300 channels. I watched like 5. But slowly, it's like everything just seems to be cyclical. And where, well, I've got to cherry pick this streaming service for this one thing, and I got to get this streaming service for this one other thing. And you add them all up together, and you end up with a cable bill anyways. So it's cyclical, right? The allure of getting away from cable was it's too much upfront, and I don't want to pay that much monthly because it's a high sticker price. Instead of $100+, I'd rather pay $99.99. And then 4 or 5 subscriptions later, you're getting close to that cable price anyway.
Sure. And you end up in the situation where you're talking about CBS Sports, which was its own thing, and now all of a sudden Paramount's part of that conversation. And you're just starting to see these mergers pull these entities back together that were all split up and were each their own independent thing. What I think is interesting, of course, is, as we sort of mentioned during the opening line, is that the combined company will be led by David Ellison as chairman and CEO and Jeff Shell as president. David Ellison is the son of Larry Ellison, who is the former CEO and current CTO of Oracle, which is one of the biggest tech companies.
Yeah, what is he doing getting into Paramount and Hollywood production, right? That's kind of a weird thing. I mean, you've seen these tech executives and tech companies get into very non-tech spaces, right? We just got finished talking about Amazon getting into sports. Now we're talking about Skydance getting into Paramount and CBS. I
mean, I think we're like in a situation where we're seeing it's like games of the wealthy almost. Like this is a legacy. I mean, obviously, Larry Ellison's a legend in the tech space, and it's it's almost like family legacy where it's you just breed leaders, you breed CEOs of companies, and whatever you want to get into, you kind of try your hand in that.
Right.
I think that we have they talk about all the time the discrepancy, and over the course of time, like CEO salaries have become disproportionately larger compared to employee salaries.
Right.
And then there's this whole claim that it's due to the fact that there's just a talent shortage of people who can lead companies at this massive scale, but it's because there's also not a lot of people who have a lot of experience doing it, which makes sense because not a lot of people get the opportunity to do that because it's a high, it's the same people that get circulated over and over. It's almost like with coaching teams, right? Like it's the same coaches. They get dropped from one team, they get picked up by another because you're like, well, there's not really a lot of people that have experience coaching a football team or coaching a basketball team, so we're gonna.
Yeah, why the hell did Doc Rivers, get an opportunity to go with the Bucks? Right, they were just fine the way they were.
You fell somewhere, and then you just get picked up somewhere else.
Exactly. I agree, and I think that the tough part is it's in the arts and the entertainment industry, right? And a lot of where I don't know. I think historically, a lot of the talent breeds up from like these smaller. Right, you start out with these smaller studios and such, and you kind of work your way up. Like Tarantino had his first movie that was private. It was small studio, small budget film, and he worked his way up. And now, obviously, he's one of the all-time greatest directors of all time. But when you see things like this, where there's consolidation and companies getting bigger and bigger, it's like the small guy ends up taking the brunt end of it. And there's just less channels to move up. And so it's tough all around in terms of talent development. You know, those channels aren't as widespread as you would want them to be, to where something spontaneous can occur. And you can't have an amazing movie that you wouldn't have seen otherwise, wouldn't have been produced otherwise. Because as you get this consolidation is more of a financial focus on things, there's much more of a, what does it make sense from a money standpoint?
Yeah.
And not so much from a content production.
Sure.
And that's where I'm kind of scared about that kind of thing.
That's the long-term impact play here, because in the world of M&A, we consider these sports deals the new like hashtag hot asset, right? Obviously, in accounting, hot assets are your cash, or AR, your inventory.
Right.
These things, I mean, these deals are super flashy. It gets people excited. People love sports, but to your point, does it lose the integrity? And we were kind of talking about this before the show. Do you lose the integrity of the sport if it becomes too overly monetized? Like, is there a line? And I'm all for capitalism and allowing the natural equilibrium of everything to work its way out. The question is there a line where it becomes too financially focused that it implodes on itself? And maybe it implodes and then it rebirths into something great, but I'd rather that not happen while I'm watching.
Right. You hope that the balance of the system will keep it in check. And that is kind of, I mean, I'm a fan of capitalism in general, but that's one of the downfalls is to those who have everything always given, to those who have nothing always taken, right? And so that's that natural progression. That's always going to take place. So what's the balancing force? And that's where we go back to antitrust laws and such, right? To counteract the system where there is a balance that exists where, yes, there are still like, the opportunity of like the small guy to be able to develop something and have some support to be able to produce a piece of content that then we can nourish talent. But when he becomes so monetized, the question just becomes, does it make sense from a money standpoint?
Yeah.
And that's I don't think that's best.
Well, and this is the downfall, is that people will always try to push things as far as they possibly can. Everybody always wants to get the most money out of a situation. Everybody always wants to pay the least out of a situation. Nobody's fine just picking something in the middle and being like, yeah, this works pretty well for most of us. Right. Because you could, I mean, in reality, would a professional athlete not play the sport if their salary was only $5 million a year? Would you be like, nope, it's not worth it, I'm going to do something? What else are you going to do?
Right.
What else are you're not going to do anything. You're still going to do the thing. Right. And then imagine that goes in. It's like, oh, well, that puts more pockets in the owners. Okay, well, if the owners are capped, well, that puts more in the league. Well, if the league is capped,
right,
then the price goes down, and everybody can watch and consume the sports, and then everybody can buy the jerseys, and there's all there's a whole macroeconomic issue that I can kind of get into the philosophy.
I'm seeing it unfold right in front of me.
Yeah, but like that's the sort of stuff that it gets me thinking. So last thing on this is just the regulatory and future outlook. This transaction is expected to take over a year to complete, pending regulatory approvals. Obviously, you have the regulatory portion of it, but this is also an accounting. I mean, to do a merger and acquisition of this type, I have no familiarity with even the level and the depth of technical expertise you have.
Yeah, I mean, you get into the merger and acquisition technical aspect, everything gets fair valued, right? So there's certain, you take the whole balance sheet, and it doesn't matter what the book value is, you have to convert everything to fair value. And that's what the sorry about that. So that's like the baseline of merger and acquisition accounting. And with that, sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Cut that out, right?
Yeah, you throw the mute on.
Throw the mute on. That's like through FaceTime. I gotta like cut that. But yes, so everything gets fair valued, and then obviously everything paid over the fair value amount get thrown into goodwill, and then you do subsequent assessments of the fair value of that goodwill on a go forward basis. GAAP and IFRS differ. With GAAP, once you mark it down, you can't mark it back up, because obviously you get into spaces where people want to take the expense hit, and then they want to be able to mark it back up. Yep. Conversely, IFRS actually takes a different approach. You can mark up and down assets. So that's one of the key differences between the two guidances.
Well, I think, would you not be able to, or if in an event where we were able to start to do mark to market, right, where you're able to mark it back up, you just have to, you should have to pay the tax on the gain then. I would think that would be the sensible thing.
Well, you get into the world of, I need to show a profit, right? Everything goes back to money, right? So ratios are all off, and let's just mark this asset up. Yeah. Say the valuation went up, and it's all soft science at the end of the day, right? Evaluating an intangible asset based on future projections and such. So then you get into the world of, again, the fundamental differences between GAAP and IFRS being principle versus rule based, gapping the rule based of you want to avoid that, and then IFRS and Europeans being much more principle based. Where no, if it needs to be marked up, things change, things go down, they go back up.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's all design. All this happens. Every accounting regulation is designed to address some sort of other hole that was plugged because somebody tried to manipulate something somewhere, and then we just create this super complex system. It kind of feels like apparently how the city of Austin was built, where it just started growing too quickly, and they just started building roads and building buildings, and then the next thing you know, they didn't actually have an infrastructure that was set to handle all the people moving to Austin.
no way.
Yeah, no.
I mean, you do feel it. You'll be on. I think what's the one street? It's got like houses as like bars, and then right behind it, the backdrop is like skyline.
Yeah,
it's like this doesn't make sense.
Right. Funny. So the last article here from this Fintech 411 is sharing the court when private equity comes calling for sports franchises. And I mean, PE investments into sports, we just kind of talked about this. Are we going to lose the integrity because these are just becoming now full-on businesses as opposed to just things that people can get excited and happy about? Because sports is the one thing, whether it's a recession, whether it's good times, whether people are happy, whether they're sad, whether we're in war or peace, sports is always one of those things that I think just brings people together. You find this camaraderie over, we like seeing people accomplish things on television that we can get excited and hyped about. It's the same reason you get that feeling when you score a goal, when you score a basket, even when you throw a piece of trash into the garbage and you're like, yes, got it, right? Like it's that feeling that we all seek, and we can kind of live vicariously through people at the highest level accomplishing and doing these things, and it gets us excited, and it's really cool. Now it's becoming totally monetized.
I mean, there's from the so we've seen this again. I come from the soccer world. That's where I played growing up. You saw this in Europe very early on. Especially like some of the Saudi companies. Fly Emirates is on all the big jerseys now. They were on Real Madrid. They were on PSG. You had the Saudi influence coming into Manchester City and all the money that came in there. It makes sense from a money standpoint, right? Regardless of what the P&L is doing, valuation of teams will always continue going up.
Yeah.
But I do also wonder, right? We saw the valuation balloon with tech companies, and we saw that kind of played out. Does the same thing happen with sports? Do people eventually does it get too big? The valuations get too big. But like to your point, since the Roman times, right? The Colosseum, sports have always been ingrained into the human spirit of let's take two sets of teams, people that are joined towards a same goal, and face them off against each other, and the best man win. Does PE and money getting involved in the sports, does that muddy up things? Absolutely. And that's kind of where you hope it doesn't muddle up the spirit of sport. But that's what the Olympics are for, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, you talk about the long-term appreciation. I mean, from an investment standpoint, it makes total sense. The NBA over the last 20 years is up over 850% compared to the S&P up, 350%.
Right.
I mean, you're getting an extra 500% return by owning a sports franchise. And I think that's where, you see it. But the interesting thing, though, about the strategy behind investments when it comes to sports teams, PE is usually going to be those it's not a pump and dump it play, but it's usually a 5 to 10 year play. You're going to invest in something, you're going to help grow it, you're going to get it settled, and then you're going to take your money out, take your return, and go invest in something else. Maybe you're one of those PEs that keeps on investing in new startups. You take them to grow, and then you get out, you start again. Obviously, you're doing that on a cycle. These are long-term investments. Like there's no plan to necessarily pull it back to investors. And I'm wondering if it's one of those pride things where it's just you want to own a sports franchise, and it makes your PE investment a more attractive, business for wealthy people to give their money to in order to make that, because they could say, oh, I'm an part owner of whatever this sports franchise is.
Invest money with us, get a club suite at some sports teams. Absolutely. I think the other interesting thing is it doesn't matter what the P&L is doing.
Yeah,
the valuation is going to go up. Your team doesn't even have to be good.
Yeah,
and the valuation is going to go up. And so you could pump a bunch of money into it, right? Yeah. Get the best players and the best talent. Sure, and maybe you win a championship here and there.
Yeah,
but you don't even have to do that, right? The valuation of sports in general, and especially the NBA, it just continues to rise.
Yeah,
for whatever, just because I think the interest, as you have streaming services, so in place, there's still pockets in the world where don't have access to sports.
Yeah.
Well, as that access enhances and you're able to stream sports, there's still an upside in where people can access watching sports. And as you're able to go into those markets, it's like, there's still an upside.
Well, I think what's interesting is this article is from the Wall Street Journal. It was done in collaboration with Deloitte. They're the ones that actually wrote it and kind of brought it to life for the Wall Street Journal. Sports franchises are seen as this very unique asset because you have customer loyalty, you have brand appreciation, you have lifetime value. I mean, when you're a fan of a sports club, you're a fan of that team for your life and hardcore, and you will be a recurring customer. You'll be returning constantly. You've built that brand loyalty where you have a base of people who are out galvanizing, and they'll go, talk down upon their friends who are on any other team, right? And so there's a lot of like that pride and appreciation for the brand. And it is a unique diversification and equity strategy for the PE companies as far as their investments goes, because it's more stable. And it's funny that it's written by an accounting firm, right? Deloitte did this. It's more stable and predictable long-term growth than traditional stocks and bonds, because we talk about it. It's withstood the test of time. Right.
I had the opportunity when I was in my audit days to actually audit a sports team. It was an MLS team. And the things that you don't hear a lot about is, and you see it more in like the not the big cities like LA or New York, but in some of the next tier cities, is some of the deals that they're able to make with cities, right? Have the stadium paid for. It's like at the end of the day, these are private corporations, but for some reason, the city will take on a tax, and the taxpayer ends up bearing the cost of building a new stadium. But at the same time, it's like you build a new stadium and it's state of the art. As a citizen of that territory, of that city, you feel a sense of belonging to that stadium for whatever reason, right? It's like, oh yeah, we have a new, like when SoFi was built.
Yeah.
I was going around talking to people about SoFi. Oh, the architecture of it, how it's like, built into the ground, and all the new features and the things that you see. It's fun to talk about that. Oh yeah, that's right in our backyard. I don't know how much of a tax hit we hit, but how much we're paying for it. But the deals that you're able to make with some of these cities, so especially if you're a real estate person, like it makes total sense because you're able to get exclusive deals with the city, or you threaten to leave. And so from that standpoint, from a tax standpoint, it's amazing the breaks that exist. Yeah. So again, doesn't matter what happens with the P&L. You take a huge amortization hit, non-cash. It's amortization, right? So you can show a loss when really there was a gain, or there was a net income. There's that as well. And just rubbing shoulders with athletes. I mean, since the beginning of time, like athletes have always been idols of society. And so being able to rub shoulders with those guys as well is always fun.
It's insane how much leverage sports organizations have in the context of their city. Like you said, you can threaten to leave and they'll be like, no, we need you to stay, because so much of the economic boom of that city is often tied to having a sports team there. At the same time, a lot of people are very frustrated by sports. It creates congestion. A lot of the locals are very frustrated by it. Sometimes they say that the economic positive doesn't outweigh the economic negative and the aura that surrounds it, but it really depends on where it's located. There's certain cities that have a better location and have a better relationship with the sports team and the stadium. But it is very ironic, I find, to have taxpayers paying for a multi-billionaire stadium.
Yeah, and where
the athletes are being paid tens to 20 to up to, I think the new contracts for right now, the quarterbacks in the NFL is like $55 million a year, which is absolutely bananas.
It is. I don't know how someone get paid $55 million to do any job, right? At some point, it's like,
nothing is worth that much.
But it's the allure, right? It's the distraction. It doesn't matter what happened Monday to Saturday. Yeah. Sunday, I'm going to sit down, tune on, and watch my team play. And if they win, it was a good week.
Yeah. Well, you know what it is? It's not worth that much as an individual thing being done. But if it's worth $200 to 200 million people,
then the economics make sense.
Right.
And again, it's incredible, man. Like, we talk about certain sports that you watch live versus on TV, and football being one of those that's good to watch live. Maybe you have something like, or football is good to watch on TV. So So that drives TV deals. And it just like, I don't know. Once I audited that sports team, I was like, man, this makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
Because the team was running at a loss. So there's a tax hit for the owner. But the real estate deals that they were making, nobody talked about that.
Yep.
And that's where I was like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So anyway, with that going on, let's move on to our bullish or bearish section here, which, just always curious about, are we feeling bullish or are we feeling bearish about subscriptions becoming a way of life? Because pulling it out from not necessarily just sports alone, which is obviously a play that these sports leagues are looking at, or streamers are really looking at sports as a way to pull people in. The reason is because they want people to stay subscribed. And when it comes to watching shows, you can watch the show like I did and then unsubscribe when you're done because there's nothing else you want to see. Right. But if I want to see sports, that recurs every year. It's for many months at a time. It's not really worth the hassle of unsubscribing and resubscribing. I'm just going to stay subscribed. I think that's the play there. Mm-hmm. So, the average consumer, this is from Yahoo Finance, the average consumer pays nearly $1,000 a year for subscriptions.
Yeah,
that's in general. I don't know if that just applies to streaming subscriptions. That's not just streaming subscriptions. That's just subscriptions in general, right. Which I would, throw the gym in there. Apple, I'm sure apps. I mean, my Amazon Prime subscription.
Right. Cloud storage.
Yeah.
For your photos and such. Can't lose those. It just goes, like I said, I'll admit myself, I confess, where I had Paramount $9.99 just for Champions League. And it's on every year. And I get to watch it and it's great. But that's really the only reason that I had that Paramount. I'm excited for the merger for personal reasons, selfish reasons, that there's going to be a lot more content and the merger goes through. But I think it's interesting how cyclical things are. Again, we bring that up where, you had the freedom of choice with subscriptions, which cable you had to just purchase the whole package. You get a bunch of channels. And then you get to a place where even the subscribing companies, they end up diversifying so much that you pay for stuff that you don't really care about. And then here we are, back to where we started with cable. I do personally think subscriptions are the way that'll stay because, again, getting tied up in a contract, right? That was actually another big seller for subscription versus cable is that you get tied up in a cable contract and it's just difficult to get out.
Yeah.
I think making it easier to get out, just as easy to get back in. I think that's where I think a consumer wants to get, where they just have freedom of choice.
Well, people like month to month, but at the same time, most of these things are on an annual basis. You're subscribing an annual basis, which I guess is still better than a 2-year contract or whatever the situation is. We work at a subscription-based SaaS company. I think does the Myers mindset change? I'm curious when it's like for an individual versus for a business, because so let's take a step back. When we were growing up, we had Microsoft Office Suite and we had all those. We had Adobe Suite and we had all those programs. It was a CD that it came. You put the CD in and you have the program. If you want to get an update, you got to go buy a new CD. You get the new CD and you have the new program. You download the program, you use the program. Now, if you're not connected to the internet, it can't verify that you have a subscription. You can't use the program because it's completely subscription based now. And you're paying a subscription. Like, what's your comfort level when it comes to, do you prefer the subscription way of doing things, or do you prefer, like, I just like to buy this once and then have it?
I like the subscription base, honestly, because you don't have to. First of all, updates happen much more frequently. So for companies, they're able to update in real time, and you don't have to wait till the one big release at the end of the year that you get it once a year. Completely besides the point, but I'm the kind of person that would lose that CD.
Yeah.
So it's nice to not have to worry about that. Yeah. But I think it works for the consumer because you get these more regular updates to whatever, whether it's a product improvement or new content, and you continue having access to that.
Yeah.
So that's why I like it. Yeah. And again, it goes back to freedom of choice, being able to, really having to, as a provider, you have to push the value, right? Like, and so the consumer, in my mind, wins in that perspective because you have to, as a vendor, you have to continue making the value argument.
Yeah, I think it's a convenience play as well, right? I could set it and forget it. It's just my razor's going to show up every month.
Right.
This program is going to get updated automatically. I don't have to go out to buy a new thing. And then from the business standpoint, I don't have to remarket. I don't have to market again like, oh, buy the new updated version. It's like, no, you just have this continuous improvement project.
And you get a close relationship with your consumer as well. If you're doing it right, you have a close relationship with this consumer and you say, what do you want next? Mm-hmm. And so the consumer does win in that regard as well, because the updates that are made are based on consumer feedback.
Yeah. I got a hot take, which I'm curious about. And this is going to have to be its own segment in and of itself at some point. But it just occurred to me that I feel like the area where I rub against mostly with this sort of stuff is like, I want to just know what it's going to cost me lifetime. If it's something that I want to have for life, or I'm pretty positive I want to know what it's going to cost me lifetime. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Because imagine you start subscribing to a car, which I could see us moving in that direction as cars become more like tech. Right. You could have a car subscription, mm-hmm. and you're subscribing to your electric. And then imagine rent is kind of like subscribing to housing. Right. And you're paying a housing subscription versus I just buy the house and I own the house, and then, whatever happens, but right. it's my place. And there's always this, do I want the certainty that comes with having the thing, mm-hmm. or do I want the convenience of having the updated thing? And I think to your point, it's just, we're in an age now where things change so quickly, technology updates so rapidly that unfortunately you can't afford to just be stuck on the old ways, because you'll be at the bottom of the list. Like, you have to be, those things aren't going to get updated. They're going to be out of date super quick. And so you'll have bought the thing, and then a year or two later, it's gone. We saw that happen with phones, where now you just return your phone every year, you get the new one. We live in a subscription world.
Yeah, and even if you can't come out, gone are the days you can have the 1 or 2 big updates a year. Mm-hmm. Because by the time you come out with it, you did your due diligence, you talk to consumers, you figure out what they want next, you come out with it. By the time you come out with it, if it's 1 or 2 times a year, it's already too late, right? And so I think people want the regular updates. Yeah. They want to continue to feel like they're getting more. If Netflix said we're going to come out with two releases of content a year, and then you can spend the next 6 months going through the content, that wouldn't work. Yeah, right. It's got to be like what's the new show? What's the new thing that's coming out?
And it's happening on a perpetual basis.
Right. And I think that extends to B2B as well. Mm-hmm. Is if I'm not continuing to see value in my business software, and if it's the same for like a long time, then it's, well, what's the added value, right? How do I substantiate this?
Content. I think technology has become so complex at this point that there's no option besides updating it in real time, because, like you said, after 6 months, it is completely outdated.
Yeah, it's definitely been an exponential curve. And I'm like, when does the curve stop going, mm-hmm. increasing in terms of the formula of continuing to increase? When does that stop?
I think we're seeing it right now when it comes to, like, for example, the iPhone, right? Like, they haven't really updated. It was a quick incline, and then it was kind of like, all right, get the new one. And then people are like, wait a second, this really isn't that different from the last one. Right. Do I really need the new one? And jarring any funny business of like slowing them down intentionally, I think the tech kind of still works. There hasn't like been, the hardware stuff hasn't been like crazy updates. Like, everything's been software focused. So I think there has to be a pivot maybe back to the hardware aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And if we focus more on like, all right, what are the metals that are most conducive to this, that we can do in the smallest size, that have the most power, if we focus more on like the hardware components. And I think this is kind of a perfect parallel to the move of back to kind of blue collar work, where there's been an oversaturation and overfocus on the white collar stuff. And like, we kind of need to get back to the basics that build the foundation for that white collar work to sort of happen. So that kind of is a good segue into just the overall business philosophy when it comes to things, because these are the things that you kind of have to think about as you're deciding whether you're bullish, bearish on the future. It's also, how do you run a business? And one of the interesting things is this conglomerate diversification, which is a business growth strategy that involves a company expanding into new industries or businesses that are unrelated to its current operations. And this is that, being agile, being ready to pivot. And we're seeing this when you have a company like Alphabet, right, which owns Google, and Google owns, they got their search engine, and they've got YouTube, and then they have all these other areas that they've also purchased and procured that you don't even realize are owned by Google, Amazon, and all the suite of things that they own. And Then even from like a business operations standpoint, you're talking about Amazon, getting into film, taking on that segment. You're talking about these conglomerates in the sports and the streaming world. Streamers are coming together. Then they're also merging with traditional network places and trying to get the sports moving into live television and live sports, making the movies, producing the movie, distributing the movie.
Right.
The whole entire this is just these big behemoth giants. I feel like are just now getting involved in everything.
I mean, with the big behemoths, right, you get the best talent. So whatever they go into, they improve. There's going to be some level of improvement, which is great. But I do think the downside of it again is like, how does new talent? You end up having from 100 roads to get to the top to now it's like down to 5, and the tipping point for me is when the best talent doesn't get developed or doesn't have a channel to excel into, right? Because that's when I think consumers win and the market wins, and is when people who are best at what they do have a channel to be able to excel.
Yeah.
And when you start putting barriers in place, I think that's where, and conglomeration is one way that happens. That's where I feel like it starts going from a positive where at the end of the day, Amazon has improved a lot of things and they're getting into spaces that are very archaic and improving, like healthcare. But when does that become a problem of new methods are now being blocked?
Yes.
Because Amazon's able to just block it for the sake of having that choice.
That's a concern that I have had, because if I'm a young entrepreneur, I'm a software engineer, or I'm a builder, I'm trying to develop a product and I make it, Amazon, they have the money to come and offer me $1 million, buy me out, and then just shelf the idea.
Right. Just for the sake of no competition.
Yeah, that's it. Just so there's no competition. And, maybe they pick it back up sometime down the line. Like they do have, like you said, these big companies have the ability to go in and make things really great if it's something that aligns with their values. But they can have just a whole bunch of disposable income to just buy out every inventor that's ever going to come up with anything that could potentially be a competitor or ancillary or related. They could buy it up thinking like, oh, this is a good thing for us, but then they just don't put resources behind it. And so your idea just kind of goes to the wayside. And at the same time, like if you tick them off and you're like, no, I'm not going to do that, they could just build their own so quickly because they can buy and find someone else to do it. So it's very discouraging to try to come up with your own thing, because you could work and you can grind and you can make the calls and make the connections and beg, borrow, and steal to get all the resources you need to try to do it just bare bones. And they can in 2 weeks, be like, oh, actually, we put a whole team of 100 people behind it. We did the thing.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you're like, well, I just spent a year working on this idea. And then in a flash of an eye, they're just able to wipe out all the progress.
Yeah. When you get this conglomeration of this conglomeration that happens, also, it's like then everyone just kind of ends up thinking the same way. And that's where I think we also lose as well, is the beauty of diversification of ideas.
Yeah.
And uniqueness of being able to do things different ways, and it's almost through that, like it's like me, like I've always found it better to come up with the creative idea. Let's say it's in product marketing. It never happens in a vacuum. Like if I'm just on my own and I'm thinking about it, and there's one way that I think about it, but if I'm collaborating with someone else, or if someone brings a unique idea and I'm like, wow, I would have never thought of that, or the two of us communicating produced an idea that neither of us would have come out on our own. And when you limit the channels as to where talent can come from, you end up just getting everyone thinks the same. It's like what I say, like I miss 90s movies.
Yeah.
I miss movies where it's just like you could just it's a simple storyline, but it's about different things in life, say. And now it's like I struggle with going to the movies because it's CGI, it's all the same. And it's like there's no unique, different idea that's happening. Right. It's all kind of just feels the same.
Yeah, all effects.
Right.
Well, I was thinking
it's kind of a somber way to end this.
No. That's why I always leave with the make meme LOL section, because that's always
nice.
a fun way to kind of bring us up and uplift us at the end. But I did think, when it comes to the conglomerates, right, there is a point, and I think we've reached a point in our society when it comes to most first world, fully developed nations. There's a level of just economic prosperity and success where you can be like, okay, does anybody need $500 million? Like, what can you possibly do? Like, is that really? And again, I want to incentivize people to start businesses, to grow them. You risk a lot, right, to start a business and to be an entrepreneur, and you should get heavily rewarded for that, right? Like, you should be able to buy that $20 million mansion. I'm 100% all for that.
Right.
But there is a certain level where I think it's like, okay, just because Amazon can own everything doesn't mean it should own everything.
Absolutely.
And I think there maybe needs to be some sort of regulatory cap on how much expansion these entities can do, because if you just let it run wild, I think eventually it does run out of control. And I think a relatable example that most people can kind of understand is Airbnbs, right? The goal of Airbnb, which is a brilliant idea of, I'm not at my house for half the year because I'm bi-coastal. Let me rent it out for the half that I'm not there, or the weeks that I'm not there, or the months that I'm not there. And that way I can subsidize, the cost of me being wherever else I am. And it's not like I'm losing money, and I'm offering this opportunity for someone to have a cheaper stay for a longer term, instead of a hotel. Great. Then people were like, oh, well, if I just like buy a bunch of houses, and then big companies got involved and they have enough money to buy all of the houses and then use them all strictly for Airbnb, which jacks up the rent, which jacks up the prices of the Airbnb. It's cheaper to just get a hotel at this point half the time.
Right.
It ruined the whole entire business model of what it was designed to be. Imagine if you limited Airbnbs where like you can only have up to 5 properties per EIN or per social security number.
Right.
So it's not completely stifling it, but it shouldn't be a thing that like people are abusing it in order to have like a business model out of it. Like, the business model is the Airbnb. It's not like I'm going to build an Airbnb business empire and have that be my full-time job. And I think a lot of these companies, when it comes to, especially with housing crisis right now, which is such a big thing, I would love to see it where it's capped. So, okay, so the husband can have up to 5, the wife can have up to 5, the LLC can have up to 5. Okay, if you have more, you don't need, any person needs more than 15 homes, right? Like, again, if you actually own 6 different houses and you want to rent them each out, like, you should 100% be able to do that, which is why I say like 5 is a good limit. But it's not supposed to be a thing where you're a serial house buyer just to rent them out on Airbnb. I think that's, the housing residential stuff, I think, is
It's hitting home.
Yeah, it hits home.
When the invisible hand stops driving what wins, I think that's when you lose. So there's a combination of you want to limit the regulations and barriers that are in way for entrepreneurs to be able to excel and produce something, because then the invisible hand will pick what's best. So then you're producing better quality products, you're producing better solutions, faster ways to do things, better way to do things, and then the market wins. If it gets too skewed in one direction, where now you have, like we're experiencing, conglomerates, where the choice of what the invisible hand, being the market, can choose limits down to a few options, then that's where you need to put in like antitrust laws and break things up, because the market is no longer the driver for what choices made and where things go. It's in the hands of companies that are just too big to fail.
Yeah. And it's only good if they're absolutely omnipotent, which at that point, who is, right?
Right.
So let's finish it up with laughing, or maybe crying. No, this is laughing. So this is a little funny meme here from the Big Four accountant, one of my favorite accounts to pull from. Prior year, focused. I don't need to document this. Simple enough to remember next year. Current year. What? And this is that moment we all had something where like you remember the moment a year ago and you're like, shoot, I knew I should have wrote this down. And now like I said I was going to remember it. I told myself I'm going to remember it. And now here I am when I need it and I don't remember it. And it's like, why didn't I write it down?
7 years of public accounting. I can't tell you how many times this has happened where I'm like, you're at that last stage and like, just get it done.
Yeah.
And then next year, like, why didn't I document?
Yeah.
Why didn't I take the extra time to just document and be able to reperform? Hopefully a good manager, a good senior is able to come in and say, hey, expand the documentation here, make sure you can reperform.
Yeah.
That is the level of documentation that's supposed to exist, is that reperformance can occur.
Yeah.
But there's also time constraints.
Yeah. I mean, I do think of this thing even like when it's on a monthly basis, when you're just like, it's the beginning of the month and I'm like, oh, I'll get the expense receipt and I'll add it at the end of the month when they send me, my transactions of everything I got to codify. And then the end of the month comes around, you're like, shoot, like, I don't remember where that receipt is. Or, oh, like now I got to go digging. Or, oh, now I've got like 100 of these. I should have just been doing it the whole entire time. Right. But you're lazy for 5 seconds, which then costs you 15 minutes on the back end.
Absolutely.
So I think obviously, of course, what would help is technology that helps you with remembering the things that you got to do and reminding you the things you got to do, which is
Absolutely
a great opportunity, I think, of obviously what Flowcast sells as well. So that brings us to the concluding cycle. I had a couple interesting stats here before we wrap things up. So interestingly enough, 99% of all U.S. households pay for at least one or more streaming service. The average American spends 3 hours and 9 minutes a day streaming digital media. So that's, getting back from work, having dinner, and then watching 3 hours of movies. And
yeah, 6 to 9 with the break for dinner in between.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
sounds about right.
or even if you say, maybe they do an hour and a half or two during the week, and then maybe you watch a movie or so on the weekends.
Right.
And that kind of pulls it up a little bit. Netflix still remains the dominant, most subscribed video streaming service with 260 million subscribers. 45% have canceled a streaming subscription within the last year because the costs were too high. And streaming platforms, Disney Plus was the most likely to get dropped if the price increases. I just think people don't see the value in Disney Plus for whatever reason. It ain't it. But they have ESPN, so that's obviously the fact that they have ESPN is a big plus for them.
Yeah, and then even with SportsCenter used to be the night show to watch, and that's fallen off for me too.
I love watching the highlight stuff, and I'll lay in bed and just watch clips from, I want to see all the highlights, the consolidated games. I think there's a big market for consolidated games. I want to see the best moments in 5 to 10 minutes from every single sport game that happened.
Oh man,
that would be much.
The number of times now I don't even watch full football games anymore because the sad realization was when they started doing every single play in a football game you can watch in like 15 minutes, and I'm like, wow, watching a game takes like 2.5 hours.
Or I'll do Red Zone, where it's just action the whole entire time with the commentary too. I have a dream of maybe one day being Scott Hansen.
There you go.
That would be fun. That would be super fun. And then on average, Americans pay for 2.9 streaming subscriptions every month. So just about 3, which puts you up to that mark of how much it could cost for traditional cable.
Yep.
And 50% of streaming users pay for a streaming service without ads. I mean, that's why that the whole incentive of getting the streaming services you pay for is that you don't have to have the ads,
right? Which
is what you had to deal with on cable. And now all of a sudden we're back to having ads on the streaming platforms. And so it is crazy how it has gone full circle.
Very full circle.
But I think the fullest circle, the one that never ends, is just sports. Sports is always going to be that thing. It's always going to be interesting to talk about. There's always going to be money at high levels involved. It's always going to be recession-proof, prosperous times-proof, war-proof, peace-proof. There's Olympics went on during World War II. Olympics are going on now. It's one of those things that always just prevails. So, Jason, it's been great having you here to fill in.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. Thanks for having me.
Cool. I hope everybody listening got some good insight here from this episode of the Fintech Flo, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks.
Thanks for checking out the Fintech Flo. As a reminder, this episode is available for CPE credit, and you can get that at Flowcademy or on the Earmark app. Details are in the description below.